Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of True DataOps. I'm your host, Keith Belanger, Field CTO here at DataOps.live and Snowflake Data Superhero. Each episode this season, we are focusing on the topic of AI ready data. And so if you've missed any of our previous episodes, you can always visit the DataOps.live YouTube channel, subscribe, you'll get notified for any upcoming episodes and when we release them. Today, I'm really excited to have a guest here, Amit, who is a senior analytics platform consultant at Formative Group. Amit, welcome to the show. Happy to have you.
Thank, thank you, Keith. Happy to be here.
So, for those of you guys who do not know, actually, I'm not going to introduce and kind of describe who you are. Amit, why don't you, for people that don't know you, give a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, I've been in this industry for about 20 plus years. Started my career off at Verizon as a mainframe developer and then worked my way all the way up to, this now AI analytic engineer. Went through Microsoft, went through a bunch of consulting companies in between. So always been data focused, when before big data was even called big data, working in big data spaces with mainframes. So this is I live, breathe, and think about data all day long.
Yeah, for those of you who do not know, I was going to kind of say that, but I'll say it now. I had the pleasure of working with the MIT on some past projects. One of them where we actually implemented DataOps.live together. It was in a healthcare organization, and I used to consider Amit my, data engineer magician. Things we could do, we kind of take my thoughts and ideas, and he would make them a reality. So it was always a pleasure to work with you, Amit. Now, going back to that initiative that we worked on together, that was in healthcare. AI at that time wasn't the headline or the major topic, but what were some of the real problems that we were trying to solve at that time?
We were getting data from various different locations on various different schedules, schemas changing, a lot of schema drift. You know, everybody trying to build development up at the same time was a lot of our challenges, is just dealing with all the data, dealing with the different data quality challenges, dealing with people stepping on each other's toes, meaning if I'm in development and I need I notice a schema drift file, I'm changing, I may update or alter the table, add a new column, but then I don't redeploy my views, so my views break, and we're trying to push something into QA at the same time, and now there's code that's in development that shouldn't make it to QA, and now we have to cherry pick commits or drop objects, or it was just a lot of chaos, I would say, really at the very beginning, because everybody wanted to build fast and deploy fast, but you're breaking things at the same time. And then you know I would say the other challenge was, like, when you're deploying something to QA into prod, again, there's stuff that shouldn't be in QA because they're not ready or something failed testing, but you still want to deploy, half that release into prod. Now you're again, manually deploying things as instead of the automated fashion. So that was a lot of it. And then at the same time, if you use, like, let's say DevOps, like an Azure DevOps, none of the pipelines were really, they're built for you know um, code, like Java, Python, blah blah blah. Nothing was really data focused, so it didn't account for running the DB test. And then we spent a lot of time building these pipelines to make them resilient, only to find out some software package updated to a newer release, and then they would break our pipelines, and then we would spend a few hours, days debugging what we thought was an issue with code, but it turned out to be an issue with the pipeline because there was some software package got updated and we didn't know about it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely was a lot of chaos. You know,
Yeah.
and I kind of want to unpack that a bit. So how did when we brought data ops to the table, how did how did that actually look? How did that actually help that environment chaos as you were saying?
I mean, honestly, like, one of the simplest things was, as a developer, I open a branch, I have a database. Like, just separation of, like, you have your own isolated environment to work off. You're not, yeah, I create a feature, that feature is associated with a database, and I can develop. And that database is cloned from prod or dev or QA, whatever you want your stable environment to be. So in those same, like when you're cloning, those same permissions get updated. So you don't have to worry about uh, you're still all those rules that exist in one environment in your feature branch exist, and you basically have an isolated development environment that you can build, test, break things without impacting the other streams of work that are going on. I think that in itself was the biggest game changer. We didn't have to worry about uh, what pipeline to use. Oh, this dependency is kind of like, you know, like not a black box per se, but we knew DataOps manage all the dependencies. They have their own release cycles, their testing. So we just had things that just worked, right? So if I said feature branch, I have not only do I have my own isolated database, I also have the dev environment that it
Right.
just works, right? So it's not like I have to install, like as a developer, I have to install XYZ components. I have to make sure DBT depends, DBT packages are all in sync. I have to make sure I have the same version of DBT or Airflow, whatever have you.
Yep.
I can go into data ops, go into the UI, click develop on my feature branch, and everything's right there, develop. Like it's not, it works on my machine. It doesn't work on the dev server. It's one, isolated environment that I can develop on.
And when you're working with other developers on your team, and I know in that case we had definitely had more than one
Yeah.
developer, um, that kind of still gives you that independence without having to worry about stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah, exactly. And then I knew, let's say they checked in a feature that I needed, I can always rebase my pipeline to the latest version of dev, and I can grab that and I can test it without, worrying about conflicts. So again, that was a huge time saver, just that alone. And it also forced everybody to check in code. A lot of times as developers, we're like, oh, it's a simple insert or a simple update statement, and once you take that ability away, things get checked in, and there's more thorough testing, as opposed to let me just quickly update this table because I can get you on your way. It kind of forces people into this rigor of like real software development practices of not just being cowboyish and altering a
Yeah.
table.
Yeah, and still getting that opportunity in the life cycle to eventually merge together to make sure what you're doing and the other developers are doing do eventually harmonize together before they go into production.
Yeah, and then also if you think about it, like a hot fix that happens, you know, your prod environment is going to be different than your UAT environment. That's going to be different from your QA environment. Creating a hotfix that can clone a prod database in an isolated environment, apply that hotfix. That is like wow. To
Yeah,
me at least, I didn't have to think of like, oh, I can't just work in UAT because we just deployed this feature that changes this table, so now it's different than prod. So of course, you can clone a database, but then how do you check the whole pipeline works against that
right.
database? That itself is a game changer in itself, right?
Yeah, back, before when we used to have to just do a break glass scenario, right? Get a temporary password and try to go right into prod and fix it right there, you know, that had risk in of itself.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing, especially when it came to QA and you would get results, let's say one, in production, you're getting number Y, and QA, you're getting like uh, some other number. Just being able to do a diff compare against the two branches and know that all the code is in the different, there's no code that was manually done in production versus QA, knowing that that's what you can do. You can use Git for what it's used for to figure out what the differences are. That was
Yep.
a huge time saver in itself too.
Yeah, and when you're in a regulated industry, like on that project was healthcare, you know, that's important to have,
Yeah,
reduce risk, right?
yeah. And even going like one of the features that not a lot of people think about, but for every time that you do a build, like what DataOps does a build, it also creates docs. So you
Right.
can go back into, you can compare DBT docs from production to QA and literally go through the different flows and see like the lineage at
Right.
that level is in itself, like every build is there's docs generated. It's not like, did you run the docs? It's just there.
They're just
And
there.
go back and you can go back, 30 days, 40 days, 50 commits, and literally compare version by version the lineage.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other platform that does something like that.
No, and then I know I've worked on projects where you didn't have a platform like this, and then you would come along, oh, we'll come back to it. We'll come back. We'll do
Yeah.
the documentation in a couple releases, or we'll do a sprint for that. And that technical debt never gets, addressed. And then you're like trying to chase down. And to your point, you know, those are mundane, important things that just happen without saying, oh, we have to plan for those activities.
Yeah. And it also, like, to a certain degree, in the back of your mind that that this commit's going to generate a DBT doc by default, you almost go and it forces you to document because it's going to show up in the documentation. It's you can't like forget about the task because it's going to build that doc. There's literally a task that says docs generated.
Yeah,
So you kind of forces you to document your code and making sure that lineage is right.
exactly. One thing you did mention earlier in the conversation, which was reproducibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, why is that such a critical thing? Um,
I mean, even if you, for like in healthcare, I know when I worked in certain organizations, one of the things was auditors would come and audit your data flow. So you may have a calculation there. How did you get to that calculation? Well, oh no, like we've had 6 releases before that calculation was. So now being able to say, this is the exact code and this is the exact calculations that happen from start to nut or start to finish. Uh, it's hugely important. I don't know how many hours it would save in auditing, especially when you're getting audited by an external source. It sometimes takes 6 months to figure out not only what version of code was at that that calculated that calculation, but then also the lineage behind it is another aspect of it because yes, that function might have not changed, but what about the six? Like, how do you know the lineage of the track didn't change that could have changed that calculation from version A to version B? So being able to see that complete pipeline and all those steps is crucially important. And then and then the other aspect of it was you may have external systems like Calibra. How do you keep everything in sync? For every version.
right.
That's where you can actually go into data ops and say, show me the difference between this commit versus this commit, not only this function, but all the way down the tree.
Yeah, and when you have multiple data engineers, I know, for example, you could be doing simple. It sounds like a simple thing like generating a hash key or a checksum,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you have one data engineer versus another data engineer, and just have something slightly off on that calculation, things blow up in then that
Yeah,
scenario.
exactly. And that definitely causes many issues.
That's for sure. So you've worked across multiple industries, multiple architectures. What does it mean for data ops to be, we say a force multiplier for the data engineer. You know, what does that mean to you?
I mean, it's a lot, but knowing that, knowing that I can, number one, I have like every time I do a change, I have an isolated environment before I even touch development, before I even touch anything else.
Right.
Knowing I can roll back is not having to think about that, not having to worry about, oh, I got to put a ticket in to create a new database because I want to test some new functionality, or maybe I need to test a new package. Just being able to say create branch, knowing I have my isolated environment, frees me up to do that, right? Otherwise, you put a ticket in to create a database, and then are the grants right? Waiting 2 days just to have my isolated environment to do some testing, or maybe to try a new feature, maybe to try Cortex analysts, or I have that environment that's isolated from development, from anybody else's. I'm not impacting them, is a huge like change. Like I can do that. I don't have to worry about. I don't have to knock on developer A's door, or talk to DBA, or get. I'm ready. Like I
Right.
can go.
Yeah. And when you're working, and I know in that scenario, you have data engineers coming onto projects who might have different backgrounds or different ways of
Mm-hmm.
doing things. You know, you don't have to spend, at least it's from my experience, we didn't have to spend, weeks trying to train people on how we do it, right? This is how
Yeah.
we do it. It's just use it.
Yeah. Like if you wanted to create anytime data ops was a tool, right? You go to data ops, create a branch. You don't even have to set up your environment. Our onboarding instructions was click develop in data ops. You have your environment. You have access to get all the connections. Nobody has to know any passwords because it's integrated, right? Like these are stuff that a lot of people don't think about, is even the governance around a development environment. Not having to, it's you're forcing, to use key vault, or secret keys, or everything's kind of like baked into the environment, where as a developer, I don't need to know passwords to anything. I can just go in my environment. Data ops tells me what I have access to. As an administrator, you kind of divvy that out, but they don't see it, but they have access to it, and it just works. So like that's a huge time saver.
Yeah. I would say some of our biggest competition is people just saying, I just can do Git actions, right? I can just
Yes.
build my own Git actions and I'm good. But I think what
Yeah.
you would just decide is that there's more than just what you can do in a Git actions that is
Yeah.
needed to do this.
But even if you think about it, yeah, sure, you can have private keys and you can set up that, but that's just to Snowflake. Like there's a whole ecosystem around you. There's AWS keys, S3 keys that you may need to know, that you need to have access to. There's, websites that you may need to pull data from. Like it's not just Snowflake. And
Right.
how to orchestrate that, and managing all the dependencies. Now you're creating a full-time role just to manage that. You may have 2 3 people building out Git action pipelines, rather than developing and
Yeah.
adding value to your business. You're now developing these internal tools, which means you have to manage these internal tools, which means you have to now worry about security issues, like Docker runtimes, the Kubernetes clusters, because you have 10 different developers doing commits at the same time, and then how do you scale that environment? Oh no, you need to rotate keys. Like there's a lot to it. It's not just as simple as let's just create a Git action. Yeah, you can, but now you're managing that environment,
Right.
right? Instead of
Right.
adding value to your business.
Right. And you hit a good point there. Though Snowflake is kind of like the core, everything that's around it, right? When we were building
Yeah.
these architects, like you had mentioned, there's Calibra, there's third-party ELT tools, there's you name it, goes on and on and on, that surround, like it's kind of like that membrane around Snowflake that have to be orchestrated with everything that you're doing inside Snowflake as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially like the organization where we were both at, they were using Calibra. That was their data governance.
Right.
Keeping Calibra and Snowflake in sync, you can build a tool. Of course, you can use Git Actions to build a tool, or go to Data Ops, get the operator, and go. Just plug in some little variables. Know it works. Know it's going to work with the next version of Calibra, because there's a team on your side managing all those dependencies. It's
Yeah.
not something I have to worry about. Oh, now Calibra is getting upgraded. It's not like our code, our actions are based on the old library. Now we have to we have to burn hours, burn task away from develop like feature A to upgrade this Calibre connector.
Yeah.
So,
And and those things never happen in a timely fashion. They always happen at the critical time in the middle of the night. Something changed and what broke, and you're investigating it, and you're not delivering to your
yeah,
business.
because when it's not your job, when it's not your full-time job to monitor all these third-party apps, or you're not looking at those release notes, or you're not looking at when this API is going to be end of life or breaking
Right.
features. So that was a main game changer to us.
Yeah. So, we weren't really using AI then. AI is the talk of the town now. I mean, in
Mm-hmm.
many organizations. How would you say, you know, an organization that is doing it manually, not having that data ops discipline versus implemented data ops, how would that you say impact their move into AI initiatives?
I mean, I think especially around governance and testing of the data. Like if you take Cortex as an example, you, of course you can just point it and create a semantic view and then start asking questions. But if it's going to generate the SQL and it'll generate the SQL properly, but if you don't have checks on your data, as simple as foreign key checks, the analyst is not going to say, oh, there's a missing key. Like when you and I developing reports, we kind of looked at the data and said, yeah, that doesn't look right. Let me do a left join and see if there's nulls. The analyst is going to say, here's the SQL based on the question, but it's not going to say, oh, you missed uh, half these transactions because the key had, going back to your surrogate key, they forgot to coalesce one of the field values, and now the key is null. Like
Right.
just having those checks and making sure every time you do a build, those checks are being run is especially it's even more important in the AI world because again, these are business analysts using Cortex or intelligence to just ask questions and they're going to run with it. It's not a report developer with 3 months validating every step of the way that data. So it's even more important to make sure those tests are in place. Are the governance are you properly is every object properly tagged and viewable, or you have row level permissions? All those need to be checked every time that your data goes. Otherwise, you're exposing data that may not, the AI is not going to know um, that this person shouldn't have access to this person unless there's checks and balance and guardrails even in place, like uh, thinking about you can't have more than the U.S. population of customers. Like if you're dealing with the U.S., even those guardrails need to be in place and thought through before you do an AI implementation, because AI is great, but it's also just it's being trained on the data that's available.
That's a key point, right? You just said like being trained on the data that's available, right? It's taking that as, especially now when you're doing things almost in a near real time, loading that in is you're training that model, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to take that as fact whether it
Yeah,
was or wasn't. And you know in, I would say, old school analytics, right? Oh, my graph looks funny, or my pie chart is off, right? It's kind of like, I can remember we used to word, it's in it's statistically insignificant. We used to say that all
yeah,
the time. You're not going to worry about it, but that has huge impacts in the AI space.
yeah. And especially with millions of transactions, even if you're off a penny on one, a couple of transactions here or there, that adds up. And it's in a very heavily regulated industry. That could be you passing an audit, or failing an audit. Which, and if you fail an audit, now that kind of takes away from the trust factor.
Right. Yeah. Y- your business, I can remember many conversations, I know as you, we have many conversations with the business, and the last thing you want to do is lose their trust,
Yeah,
right? Is you have a, I know we were kind of talking about this before we even got on, right? Is you know we want to make sure our reputation as data practitioners, you know is trusted, and so putting that behind our work is critically important.
yeah. I mean, 100%. And yeah, that's even little things such as uh, in AI sometimes it wants to help, so it's being as helpful as possible, but it's not going to check to see if categories from source A and categories from source B line up, right? So even adding those checks and those mapping rules and saying, oh, we have new categories that don't line up because the AI, let's say you're searching for uh, some kind of medical treatment, and if you don't classify the data correctly and there's misclassifications, it's not going to return those records to the users. And now all of a sudden, user A gets a number, user B gets a number, and now they're saying the data is really bad. We can't trust your data. The data is actually not like transactions are there. It's just how you query the data.
Right.
Not anticipating some of these data quality issues that could impact the trust in your data at the end of the
Yeah, and in some of these industries like healthcare, you know,
day.
sometimes people's lives are are at stake with information that you're providing out there, right? So we
Oh
bring
yeah.
that up with some importance. So I know we're getting close to time, and I know you and I could probably go on talking forever. If you could give a piece of advice to a data engineer or teams chasing like AI, what kind of advice would you give them in this space?
I, I would say focus on looking through your data, adding the rules, putting the guardrails in place, really checking data governance, and really focus on tightening up, because at the end of the day, AI can be used to generate SQL. Like you're having to worry about the bigger picture. So is your pipelines, can you reproduce the number that the AI is generating? If you can't, why can't you reproduce that number? You should be able to, you know, even though there's 10 different check-ins, 10 different deployments, you should be able to reproduce a number. If you can't, backtrack it all the way down. Look at like how you're versioning data, how your pipelines are being built. Look at um, all the little things that make the system more reliable before you take endeavor on this AI journey, because AI is great, but without proper data, without proper guardrails, without proper data quality checks, it's not going to be trustworthy. And if it can't be trustworthy, no one's going to use it. And then that's where the shadow IT comes into place.
I love the shadow ITs. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, well, to kind of wrap it up, it kind of put out AI doesn't eliminate the need for data ops. And basically, we said here it makes it essential. The fundamentals we put in place years ago, are exactly what is enabling AI success today. So, Amit, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. I'm, always happy to talk to you, and it's been a while, so it was great to catch up with you today.
Thank you.
So again, until next time, this is Keith Belanger. Remember, good enough data is not AI ready data. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all
Thanks.
next time.
Bye.